One sunny morning at Clearwater Harbor, Florida, veteran Charles Reed, 80 years old, stood before the iron gate of the local sailors' club, wearing his old Navy cap, his gaze as resolute as when he was 20. But he was stopped. A young manager, polite yet cold, said softly, "Sorry, this place is for active members only. You're no longer eligible." No longer eligible? A man who once commanded a rescue ship through the storm of 1971, who brought 18 young sailors back from the brink of death, now denied just because of his age and an outdated wooden boat? But 1 hour later, the Florida sky will roar with jet engines, a squadron will circle above the harbor, and a silent truth will be awakened. Are you ready to witness this emotional reversal? Don't forget to subscribe to the Veteran Best Stories channel so you won't miss these heart-touching stories. Charles Reed was accustomed to the sound of waves pounding against the hull and the salty taste always clinging dry to his collar. The sea had once been everything to him, where he grew up, where he came of age, where he lived and nearly died many times. The sea breeze had taught him how to stand firm amid chaos. The waves had taught him how to remain silent without being weak, and the years in the Navy had taught him how to hold lives in his hands, even when hope was as thin as a thread. He had been a commander, not the type to raise his hand and shout, but the type to look straight into the storm and know what to do. Cold, decisive, always the last to leave once everyone was safe. During the 1971 storm, when the world believed the rescue ship USS Harper was lost, it was he who kept everyone alive for 48 hours on the roaring sea. 18 young sailors returned, drenched and trembling, but alive. And in his hands was the makeshift radio, that old device he had repaired with copper wire from a broken transceiver and a hairpin from a young sailor. 49 years had passed. This morning, he returned to Clearwater Harbor, not to recall past achievements, not to be acknowledged, but simply to sit, to gaze at the sea, to watch young sails cutting through the water, and quietly remember a time. He came alone, with only his old gray windbreaker and a small wooden box he held in his hands. Inside lay the first-class medal, now tarnished, its metal surface scratched by time and storms. The Sailors' Club gate gleamed. The young gatekeeper looked polite, but his eyes revealed no empathy. "Sorry, sir. This place is for current members only. You don't have a valid pass." Charles slowly presented the old card. The paper blurred, the stamp faded. The guard looked at it, then shook his head, as if handed something from another century. "We updated the system. This card is no longer valid. And, to be honest, this place prioritizes modern boats. And you?" He trailed off, but his gaze said it all. Charles did not argue. He only nodded silently, then turned his back. His steps felt heavy, not because of his body, but because of a dull ache, the kind that arrives when a deep part of you is brushed aside and no one bothers to look back. He left the gate, found a wooden bench near the shore, outside the member area. From there, he could still see boats docking, children playing with floats, laughter rising from the club. But it all felt as though it were happening in a world he no longer belonged to. He opened the wooden box, placed it on his lap, his hands trembling as he gently lifted the metal. Sunlight fell on it, but the metal only shimmered briefly before sinking into its aged bronze hue. Charles stared at it for a long time, as if trying to hear the waves of the past echo from this small object. No one was around to witness it, but if there were, they would see his eyes, quiet, but not empty. How he wished someone remembered. How he wished, at least once, Someone looked at him not as an old man, but as someone who once kept a ship from sinking. The sea breeze still blew, the sails still raced ahead, but his heart was no longer at peace. Not because of being turned away, but because it made him realize a cruel truth. The world waits for no one to remember. Memories have no place in membership records. Loyalty, sacrifice, and the years he once called pride, all now confined in this old wooden box. Charles closed his eyes. He did not cry, but his breath faltered like a receding wave. He sat there, alone in broad daylight, amid the laughter of people who did not know what they had just missed. And in that silence, Charles did not know that. In just 1 hour, the sky above him would tremble. People pass by him without stopping. Footsteps lightly brush past the bench where he sits. Some are talking on the phone. Others laugh with friends. They see an old man in a gray windbreaker, sitting silently before the sea, his eyes as if shrouded by a thin mist. But no one knows that this man once held the fate of a ship in the heart of a storm. No one knows he once ordered the bow to cut through waves in darkness, once read the wind by intuition when every instrument failed, and once preserved the lives of 18 people by his own will. A storm does more than shatter a hull. It lays bare the deepest courage within a person. Charles endured that in 1971, a strange storm, sudden and raging. While the radio remained silent, he was offshore with a crew of young sailors, and instead of waiting for rescue, he was the one who brought them all home. No one knows that. No one sees the scar beneath his sleeve, the sleepless nights etched into his slow gait. An hour passes. He still sits there, unmoving, not rising, as if leaving this bench would bury something vital forever. He cradles the small wooden box in his hands. His fingers occasionally tighten around the metal inside, unseen by others. Yet, like a silent vow, do not let the past slip away. His gaze remains fixed on the sea. Waves break in steady rhythm. The wind drifts through his hair. No words of complaint, no trace of anger, only a profound, still emptiness. A silence understood only by those who have borne great burdens in darkness. No one needs to know, but when no one remembers, it leaves a nameless chill within the heart. He feels no anger toward the club's gatekeeper, nor toward passers-by who do not spare him a glance. The morning's refusal was like a door closing slowly and soundlessly, leaving one frozen in place, not from shame, but from the realization that all one has lived and sacrificed can be forgotten so easily. The wind still blows, the sea remains blue, everything seems as before, yet within him, something is on the verge of breaking. A part of him, the part that always believed true worth would never be forgotten, is trembling. He recalls the USS Harper, the moment communications were cut, the instant he chose to turn the bow sideways, exposing the hull to waves to keep the radio transmitter alive for those final minutes. He remembers the worried looks of the young sailors, how they sat in silence together as water rose along the sides. None dared to speak, only trusted him. He remembers the moment the first helicopter appeared in the sky, when he knew they had caught his faint signal, when he realized that what he did, maintaining contact, remaining calm, keeping them from surrendering, had meaning. And then he remembers receiving the medal, a small, quiet ceremony, few cameras present, only a handful of commanders, a group of comrades, and the folded flag handed into his own hands. He did not keep the dress cap, did not keep photographs, only the medal, like an irreplaceable fragment of memory. Now that medal lies in his palm like a milestone, like proof that he once lived a life of meaning. Yet out there, no one knows. No one calls his name. No one asks why he sits here. Only those passing by, those continuing their lives. And amidst it all, Charles feels drained, gently and quietly, like a tide receding without anyone noticing. The world is busy. People change. Old achievements find no place in modern clubs. He is not angry at being refused. He is pained by the understanding that, in their eyes, he has never existed. And though the sea still breathes evenly, though the Florida sky remains clear, within him a storm quietly churns. No wind sounds, no thunder, only the unspoken loneliness of someone who devoted a lifetime, then one day realized no one remembers anymore. He still sits there, alone, amid the familiar breeze. But this time, he no longer feels the sea's comfort. Only one thing keeps him from rising, something unfinished. And he waits, not knowing why. For deep within, something still lingers somewhere offshore, like a belated response, like a faint sound soon to return. The first jet engine roar cut through the tranquil sky like a slash. Its timbre not only touched the air but carved through the silence that had enveloped the harbor all morning. That sound stirred ripples on the water's surface. It caused hands holding coffee cups to freeze. It made children riding bikes halt and look up. No one could ask in time. No one knew what was happening. Yet everyone felt that, in that moment, something was shifting. Against the clear sky, a squadron appeared. 5 jet fighters flew in a V formation, moving with absolute precision. No wobble, no disorder. As if their flight were calibrated to the commander's heartbeat. Their metal wings sliced through the wind with pride, leaving behind a deep sonic trail that needed no explanation to convey. This was no ordinary flight. Charles looked up. He did not blink. The wind blew against his face, lifting strands of silver hair. Yet he remained still. His body seemed carved in stone on the old bench. And then he recognized. He gazed at the formation, his eyes suddenly tense, not from astonishment, but because a memory surged up like a blade driven inward from the depths of his heart. The lead jet tilted slightly, a movement too subtle for those unaware, but a life-or-death signal for someone who had once commanded. This was not an acrobatic maneuver for show. It was a greeting coded, layered, profound. A greeting not sent to the crowd, but meant for one person, Charles Reed. And he understood. Before he could react, a second sound rose. The warning siren from below the harbor. A wholly different sound. Sharper, clearer, closer. It was the churning of helicopter blades. Then its image appeared at the edge of the landing zone. A Navy helicopter, painted silver, bearing rescue unit insignia. It descended slowly, as if every inch were aligned with respect. The door opened decisively, like a soldier clearing a path on the battlefield. No announcement, no procession, only one person stepped out, clad in a dark blue flight suit that hugged his form. He removed his helmet visor, and with his eyes alone, he found the one he had come to meet. Charles remained seated. The pilot walked a few steps forward. The crowd parted gently to either side. No one spoke, as if no one dared to interrupt that moment. A moment more sacred than any formal ceremony ever held at this harbor. The pilot halted, standing erect as a ritual. No microphone needed. No repetition required. His voice sounded just loud enough, yet firm, slicing through the wind like a thin blade. "Commander Reed, we have come to honor you." No applause. No reaction. The silence became the only music left at the harbor. Charles looked up, his eyes trembling slightly. He said nothing, nor did he rise. He only stared at that pilot, the man who had used his old rank, long thought buried under layers of time. In that gaze lay all the years forgotten, the times he sent signals with no reply, the meals in the quiet house without anyone calling, the memories no one inquired about. And now this young man, a continuation of his life's story, was approaching not as a fan, but as a soldier answering an order from the past. The sea breeze still blew, but this time it was not cold. Charles gripped the wooden box holding his medal, not from fear of losing it, but as if to keep his emotions contained within his chest. He did not need to ask who the pilot was. The way he stood, the way he looked at him, the way he pronounced "Commander," all said, "I know who you are. I have waited for this day for a long time." After a while, Charles merely nodded. Not the nod of someone newly honored, but the nod of someone who has heard the final signal from the universe. You are still remembered. You still have worth. The pilot did not advance further. He simply stood there, and that was enough. In that moment, Charles was no longer sitting alone on the bench outside the fence. He stood amid awakened memories, recognized not by paperwork or applause, but by the one thing he had needed his whole life, someone responding to the signal he once sent. The young pilot stepped slowly toward the bench, as if each footfall carried an unwritten chapter of memory. The sea breeze swept across his shoulders, his flight cap removed and held tightly in his hands, like a silent ritual of respect. Standing before Charles, he did not bow, he did not smile. He stood erect, solemn, as before a living monument. "I am Lieutenant Mason Blake," his voice rang out, steady and decisive, without a microphone. 15 years ago, you taught me at the Jacksonville Naval Academy." Charles said nothing, yet in his eyes something shifted, like a streak of light across a formerly overcast sky. Mason looked straight at him, unblinking. "But I knew of you even before that," he continued. "You were the rescue ship commander in the 1971 storm. You saved my father." Those words fell onto the harbor like a heavy stone striking still water, and then silence. A hush so deep that even the sound of waves seemed to pause. Those who once turned away from Charles, who once viewed him as a lonely old man, now stood frozen like statues. No one moved. No one looked away. Charles remained motionless, yet his hand, resting on the small wooden box holding the medal, now tightened, not to protect an object, but as if holding on to himself, holding back something swelling fiercely in his chest. He looked at Mason without uttering a word, but his eyes conveyed emotions never previously permitted to surface. Heartfelt gratitude, astonishment, and something very close to pride. Mason took another step. Not too close, just enough to maintain respectful distance. "I do not know if you remember my father," he said, voice lower, softer. "He was the navigator, his leg trapped beneath the deck when the ship listed. Rescue teams could not reach in time. You were the one who brought him out of the engine room, and my father always said that day you saved 2 lives. Charles tilted his head slightly. The wind lifted strands of silver hair onto his forehead, but his gaze did not leave Mason. His lips pressed together, as if opening them would unleash an overwhelming tide of emotion. "You did more than save them," Mason said, inclining his head slightly, Voice hushed. You taught us that when no one is watching, we must still do what is right. When no one acknowledges us, we must still believe in our own worth. A gust of wind swept across the water, yet no one stirred. In that moment, the harbor ceased to be a tourist spot, ceased to be a meeting place for racing boats or club members. It became witness to something sacred, memory called by name, history revived, an old sailor restored to what he had never demanded, recognition. Today, Mason paused, eyes fixed on him. We will not let you be forgotten. Charles gazed at him, eyes reddened yet unshed. He did not cry. He did not collapse. He did not diminish himself. He sat there, upright, hands on his thighs, as firm as when he once sat on a deck awaiting the first storm. Then, he nodded. Not a perfunctory nod, nor a gesture of courtesy, but an acknowledgement that he understood, that he knew this moment was real, that after years living silently on the margins of the modern world, at last his voice had been heard. His expression hardly changed, yet if one looked closely at the corner of his eye, where only time can touch, there was a slight tremor. Mason said nothing further. He simply stood. A few squadron members stepped forward behind him, not in formation, not on command. They needed no introduction. Their presence alone was declaration. They had come not to perform. They came for him, a worn man with a wooden box and eyes that had witnessed too much forgetting. Within Charles, images unfolded like old scenes passing slowly. He saw the faces of long-ago sailors clinging to life in darkness, trembling hands grasping his, and then the image of this young officer before him today, standing straight, resolute, as if a continuation of the generation he once held safe at sea. The wind still blew, but now it was no longer a cold intrusion. It was the breath of something released. Charles tightened his grip on the wooden box. For the first time, not in defense, but as an act of gratitude. No ceremony was performed, no drums or trumpets, no new medal presented. But for Charles, that moment, between the old teacher and the former student, was the highest honor he had ever received in his life. The club manager stepped slowly. Each footfall seemed to bear an unseen weight. His hand gripped the brim of his hat, not because of the wind, but as if seeking a hold to steady himself amid a reality suddenly reversed. His face was blank, not a word spoken, no excuse offered. And when he reached Charles, he merely bowed his head. Silence. Amid a crowd holding its breath, in an atmosphere strange and solemn, as if part of an unspoken ritual, he produced a small object, a card. On its silver surface was engraved, Honorary Member Charles Reed. The manager's hand trembled slightly as he handed it over, not from fear, but from understanding that he was touching something greater than a membership card, something he had forgotten, yet was now compelled to remember. The presence of a man who once placed others' lives above his own name. Charles said nothing. He did not stare at the card for long. He simply rose, neat and deliberate, like a soldier accustomed to roll calls without names called aloud. He accepted the card with a slight nod, not in a raised voice, not with a shrug, not with flourish, just a simple gesture, enough to convey, I understand. And I forgive. The breeze still swept across the harbor, yet everything around seemed to pause, as if even time needed a few moments to accept this change. Then, in the quietest moment of that day, a female voice came over the PA inside the Naval Command area, echoing through iron posts and cables. On behalf of the United States Navy, we are proud to announce this year's annual regatta will officially bear the name Reed Regatta, a competition honoring courage and endurance, inspired by Rescue Commander Charles Reed, who saved 18 sailors during the storm of 1971. The announcement was brief, but enough to shatter all whispered fragments. In an instant, the harbor, once a place of leisure gatherings, became a living memorial, where people turned to one another in surprise. Then, like a wave of sound sweeping through the air, applause began. From the group of pilots behind Mason, to children standing by their bicycles, from servers still holding coffee cups, to senior club members who had turned away just an hour earlier. All applauded in unison, not the loud clamor of a festival, but a deep, measured rhythm, a beat of respect. Charles stood at the center, still. He did not raise his hand. He did not wave. He did not nod in thanks. He simply stood there, the card in his hand, as a truth slowly burst within him. For the first time in decades, living in the shadows, he no longer needed to shout in silence. He was heard. Every word from Mason, every recognizing gaze, each clap like invisible radio signals finally tuned in to the frequency he sent out in earlier years. Signals once lost to the void were now answered with acknowledgement. Tears streamed down his cheeks. No sobs, no sign of weakness, just droplets rolling over wrinkled skin, falling onto his worn jacket, as quietly as he had lived his life. No one looked at him with pity, for today, those tears were the most sacred sight this harbor had ever witnessed. Not for the title, not for an honorary card, but because finally, what he had always upheld, ideals needing no applause, loyalty needing no stage, silent courage, had been named rightly. In the crowd, a boy tugged his father's hand, softly asking, "Who is he?" The father bent down, replying quietly, "A man who never abandoned anyone." And behind them, the club's sign was temporarily replaced to read, "Home of the Reed Regatta, for those who never give up." Charles remained standing. His hand clutched the card as if holding all the fragments of a memory once swept away by the wind. Within him, an old chapter closed, not with a farewell spoken aloud, but with a peaceful look. And somewhere in the breeze, like an old radio voice, came the echo, "We have received your signal, and we are here." The next morning, the first light swept across the harbor like a thin silk ribbon. It sparkled on the calm water and the steadfast masts. No noise remained. No crowd remained. Only the sacred stillness of a place that had just witnessed something immense. On the main mast, a small bronze plaque had been newly affixed. Its dark bronze gleamed in the sun like a slow-burning flame, and on that metal background, the hand-engraved inscription stood clear, simple yet cutting straight to the heart. This is where Charles Reed was once refused, and also where he was honored. No drums or banners, yet anyone passing by paused, read each word slowly, and nodded in silence, for they knew this was meant for no one else but a person who had fought in silence all his life without ever seeking credit. Charles no longer sat on the wooden bench by the deck, no longer with those keen yet quiet eyes looking out as if reading memories from each wave, no longer with gaunt hands clutching the weathered wooden box of time-worn color. Yet he remained there, in the memories of those who witnessed, in Lieutenant Mason's measured voice from yesterday, in the way children sat quietly listening as parents spoke of someone who had lived a lifetime for others. In the image no one could erase from the mind, a man with a faded navy cap, standing upright against the wind, as if the wind could not sway him, as if time itself had tried to forget him, yet even time had to pause and bow. The story of Charles Reade was not merely a hero's tale. It was a reminder of the power of steadfastness, unseen, not needing to shout, yet capable of moving what seems immovable. It was testimony to a belief that must not be forgotten, the belief that no matter how faint the signal, if we keep sending, someone will at some point receive it. A sail, a wooden box, a nod, may not change the whole world, but sometimes it's enough to change a community, a generation, a perspective. And if you believe in those values, unconditional loyalty, enduring patience, silent heroes, subscribe to Veteran Best Stories and share this story, for perhaps, somewhere, someone still sits by a harbor with an old radio, hoping their own signal will be heard.